Welcome back to the OIS Podcast. In this episode, Paul Ribb talks about how waking up with central vision loss affected his investment banking career and how it has brought him to a place of developing innovation to help others while becoming world champion of visually impaired tennis along the way. Let's listen to this inspiring story.
Hello, OIS Podcast audience. Happy to be speaking with you again today. I don't know how many of you out there have listened to any of my previous podcasts, so I'm going to spend 2 minutes just introducing myself so you know the perspective from which I am about to conduct this next interview. But my name is Rob Rothman. I am an ophthalmologist, a glaucoma specialist by training. I've been in practice for the last 23 or 24 years, starting to lose count. And in addition to maintaining clinical practice, I am also the co-founder and co-managing member of InFocus Capital Partners, which is an ophthalmic life sciences focused venture capital fund. We have just about completed the investment phase of our first fund, maybe making one more investment. We're working that out right now. We have 13 ophthalmology assets, and we are currently contemplating the end of Fund 1 and the hopeful soon to be launched Fund 2 within the near future. I have had the privilege of meeting our current podcast guest very serendipitously, and I have spent some time speaking with him over the past few months. And Craig and Maureen and the team at OIS have given me some liberty of deciding who I'd like to interview. And after hearing Paul's story and speaking with him on multiple occasions, I thought this would be an absolutely fantastic opportunity for the listening audience to get to know somebody who I find incredibly intriguing and somewhat inspiring as well. So no pressure there, Paul. But just to make the formal introduction, today we will be talking with Paul Ribb. He is, I guess by way of introduction, a long time, probably 30-year veteran of the investment banking industry. He also happens to be the world visually impaired tennis champion, world champion. And he has now dedicated his skill set and expertise to work across all areas of the vision loss environment to try and identify promising assets within ophthalmology to help cure blindness and treat ophthalmic disease. So the perspective from which Paul comes, and I'll let him describe it in a little bit greater detail later, is one of a finance background, visual loss. I'll let him explain where that came from. And now moving forward to try and help others through his diverse skill set. So I hope that was a good enough introduction, Paul, but it's hard to put into words everything you've done so far in life. So sort of leave it at that and let you sort of say hello and introduce yourself, I guess, at this point.
No, thanks, Rob. And I am flattered and blushing for those that can see. But I know, as you say, I've had a fascinating few years. Quite unexpectedly, I lost all of my central vision at the age of 37 to macular disease, macular dystrophy, macular degeneration, has many names, but the outcome is the same. You basically go from, sort of usual sight, maybe some refractive errors. Fine, I was very short-sighted, but I drove, I did everything that one would do with contact lenses and correction, but literally woke up at the age of 37 and couldn't read, couldn't see faces, no longer allowed to drive. And that was a big problem for me because I lived a fast-paced life as an investment banker, had a lot of risk profile responsibilities, and it was life-changing for me in not just my professional career, but also my private and personal career.
So let me jump in. I'm going to interrupt you a lot during this because I think there's a lot of points to highlight here. So you were basically cruising along, living a nice life, doing well as an investment banker, and then you wake up one morning and you're like, wow, why can't I see so well? So what happens? You go to the eye doctor, and what do they do? What happens at that moment?
I drove to work, which was just typical me, not understanding my problem, and I then decided I better go to Moorfields because I was having trouble, and where my offices were in the City of London was near the preeminent eye hospital. So I basically went to Moorfields, sat there for a few hours, managed to arrange a private appointment with a top consultant who took some pictures of my eyes and basically said to me, "You have got central vision loss. We can't fix it. It's dry macular disease. And you're going to get symmetry in both of your eyes. So no more driving for you, please. And thanks very much for coming." And I was literally cast out of his office with that news, having no idea who I was going to call, what I could then do, and still baffled as to how I could have been in a top eye hospital with no option for cure. So I was very confused at that point. And I remember sitting on the steps of Moorfields on my own, just thinking to myself, life's going to change here. This is going to be a rough time. And I actually went back to my office, and I was very lucky in that I sat next to a guy called Simon Halliday, an England rugby player, who had literally met a blind charitable organisation in the City of London called Blind in Business, who just coincidentally happened to be next door to my offices. So where Moorfields were unable to offer me any advice or support or guidance as to next steps, I literally picked myself up and went into the Blind in Business offices. And there, really, I would say, was the beginning of the new chapter of my life. These guys were brilliant. They had answers where I thought there were no opportunities or no prospects. They had solutions for what I basically term affectionately as the ability to live and succeed with sight loss. And that kind of positive energy is exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. So,
okay, so we're going to run this like a book. So that's the prelude to the next two chapters. So when I write books, I like to jump around. I've written so many. I'm sure you know them all. But I think that what I'd like to do is now let me take a step back and tell me about your finance background. Tell me about what you did previously before this sort of happened, and how you progressed through the world of finance and where you all the way through to where you're pretty much, I guess, retired. And tell us about that so people understand your financial background, because it's going to be very important when we get to the final chapters of this interview.
Absolutely. So I started life in 1993, having finished an economics degree at Manchester University. I basically was one of the lucky graduates that won a place on the HSBC James Capel Investment Banking Graduate Program. This was 1993. That was a big deal. You're fighting against, even today, you're fighting against thousands of people to win a spot on these graduate programs after college. And my career basically evolved through equity research analysis, where I effectively trained to become a financial analyst, where I luckily in the 90s specialized in the hottest sector on the street, which was telecoms. And I eventually evolved into a telecoms media and technology specialist through many of the 90s biggest, hottest deals, because telecoms was the hot privatization sector of the moment through that era. And I was lucky enough to work for the top banks on the top deals in equity research. And as a result of that, my career really escalated in that I was offered many jobs at different banks, where I ultimately took the job in 99 at Lehman Brothers, where I was joined by a whole host of great talented people. We became known on the street as effectively the number one ranked team by our peers through Institutional Investor for 7 consecutive years in the telecom market. So we were the big guys on the street in telecoms for all that time. And I really loved it, loved the team that I was working with, loved the success we had, loved the international travel and the deals we were doing. They were really exciting times. Obviously, I knew my eyesight was troubling me, getting worse, but I carried on coping with that all through the 2000s. And then something miraculous happened in that in 2007, I wake up and I can't see very well. And I really, as we've discussed, was obviously shocked from that point. But then I really made it my ambition to figure out how to live and succeed with that. And I went about finding all the technology that could enable me as a senior executive in banking to understand how I could still work with my team and be involved in a risk environment, which is effectively where we were in terms of trading and investing and advising within the telecoms market. And I was amazed that actually there was solutions out there, Zoom text, Magic software, which was overlay software, which allowed me to basically magnify and color invert everything I was doing on my computers. And there's some lovely pictures of me sitting with 6 very large screens with lots of magnification technology, allowing me to do the job I continued to do. But something very strange then happened in that Lehman Brothers, as people will be aware of, blew up in 2008. And I, at that point, understood that I was privy to permanent health insurance, which meant that if my eyesight continued to degenerate, I would qualify for effectively an insurance policy which would just retire me on the basis of disability. But when Lehman Brothers disappeared, I lost my right to that insurance policy, which meant I had to start all over again. And I was lucky to lean on my financial career and my success to then be headhunted ultimately to go and lead a team at the Royal Bank of Scotland who wanted to establish a telecoms team. And coincidentally, they actually had the permanent health insurance policy at that bank as well. So I was able to go and work at RBS in the knowledge and comfort that in the event that my eyesight would render me incapable of working, that the bank and myself would be adequately insured. So today I spend a lot of my time recommending and advising people, both able-bodied and disabled people, to genuinely look at their HR policies and see if their companies have things like the permanent health insurance or group income protection scheme, because it's such a powerful policy, particularly when you understand that 85% of people in the disabled market have become disabled rather than were born disabled, like myself. So I must thank at this point a man called Dennis Lewis. Dennis Lewis was the man at the Macular Society who told me about this insurance policy, and that, knowing that that policy existed, really empowered me to continue with my career. And I would say that I was more successful in investment banking even after losing my central vision. And I got promoted to managing director, was still handsomely paid, was still working on big deals, etc. So I still think that if you're guided correctly by the peer support early enough and ask the right questions, as I was doing, because I was ambitious to carry on rather than quit, you can find a way to carry on living and succeeding in doing what you're doing, despite the challenges that you're faced with in not actually seeing. That's really what I would say is a strong message. Ask the questions and go for peer support.
So you powered through this. So you had this visual loss. You continued to work and excel through the finance world, eventually moving from Lehman to RBS, and stayed there until when?
So officially, I left RBS in 2016, we had some good years at RBS. Ultimately, RBS wound down their investment banking operations. They were 83% owned by the government, so we were always on a sticky wicket when it came to risk management and trading and investment banking. So with that in mind, I was always looking for a new avenue to channel my knowledge and experience. And in 2016, I went to work for a private family office where I ran a long-short absolute return portfolio. So I was effectively trading long-short ideas on the basis of my TMT experience.
So more typical hedge fund type investing.
Exactly. And in 2018, had my most successful year ever, basically, in terms of trading. So, that was the culmination of all of my knowledge experience, really concentrating in one great trade. It was a US-UK trade, B-Sky B, which was ultimately taken out by Comcast and Fox Disney transaction, which was just a wonderful experience to be involved in. But after all of that, I was really looking for other avenues and other opportunities. And I was already heavily involved in the charity sector. So I was on the board of a number of sight loss charities, even at that stage.
I want to talk for a few minutes about tennis, because this is one of the most fascinating aspects of you. And it's not, I don't think, an easy thing to become the world visually impaired tennis champion. I'm sure there are a lot of people who have been very good at tennis who've had visual impairment and are not the world champion. So I'm assuming you played tennis throughout your life, and this is an extension of that, not that you learned how to play tennis after you became visually impaired, correct?
So I played a lot of sport. I raced cars. I was a very competitive guy. And losing my edge or my ability to see meant that I couldn't play with what I considered the big boys. I couldn't play with my friends, couldn't play competitively in football, soccer, as you guys know it. But I was never, in any national or, county teams. I just enjoyed the competitive and friendly community aspect of playing sport. And sure, as a kid, I played for teams and the like. When I was announced as visually impaired, and I got involved with some of the charity community peer support aspects of learning about how to live with sight loss, I was introduced to the idea that to live and succeed with a disability, you need to add some extra things to your bow, which is you need to get fit, because your body is going to be exhausted trying to live in the mainstream world, whether you're working or whether you're doing anything. You need to adjust your fitness levels and your concentration levels. And I was very early on through the Macular Society group meetings that I went to, was introduced to visually impaired sport, which again, these are foreign worlds to me. I had no idea these levels existed. I knew of the Paralympics, but I didn't know that there was a beautiful and competitive landscape in disability sport. So one of the sports was blind football. I went along. That was a lot of ex-army guys, very aggressive. And I thought, this is not for me. So I thought, you're going to get your nose broken. They enjoy hitting you, right? So, and I figured this is not for me. But then I was introduced to blind tennis. And I thought, well, how does blind tennis work? We're all visually impaired. We're not going to be able to see the ball. And very quickly, I was shown what it was. It was played down in Wimbledon, which is the home of British tennis, obviously. And I traveled down there and I saw this was brilliant. They were playing in sports halls at the time with an adapted ball, which was basically a sponge ball with a bell in it. And you get 2 bounces. If you're partially sighted, you get 3 with a blindfold. If you're blind and you're on a smaller court. When I say blind, 100% blind versus the grades of competitive sport, right? So your B1, B2, B3 is the different levels of sight that you're graded to compete. And I thought, now this is a gentleman's sport. I could really get involved in this. And I started playing it, and I was blown off the court by the younger kids and some of the more experienced players. And I thought, how am I going to win this? I need to get fitter. So at that point, a leaflet dropped through my door on kickboxing at my home in London. And I thought, well, maybe a bit of hand-eye coordination might be good. But I was advised that I can't take a hit to the head, so I can't do any contact fighting. But I could do choreographed fighting, which is effectively what kickboxing is. You just learn, strong core and balance and strength and all that goes with kickboxing. So I literally threw myself into kickboxing, got to black belt, and gave that up because that was really all you could do with kickboxing was just get to black belt. As a result of getting fit with kickboxing, and like I say, when I mean getting fit, I mean doing 200 push-ups and 100 kicks and all this kind of stuff. It's like revolutionary. I was transforming my body. I was never getting into that kind of shape if I wasn't going down that path. That led me to being super fit when it came to the competitive VI tennis. And I started to really win. And I became British champion 3 times in a row. And then after 2012, you could see that the Paralympics in 2012 really set the world alight for disability sport. That then created the international arena for cricket, football, tennis on the visually impaired circuits. And in 2018, we got invited a GB team got invited to play in the World Championships. In Ireland, we had 30 countries turn up, and it was a brilliant event. And I'm proud to say that I won my sight category against a very, very good Mexican kid who has now gone on in 2019. He went on to win the title not against me. I got knocked out in the semis. But the beauty of it is today I'm ex-world champion and still world number 2. And we await, after COVID, the re-establishment of the competitive circuit, for which my first tournament is next weekend in South Wales.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's unbelievable. I mean, you know, sort of take a skill set, adapt it to your impairment, and then sort of excel to become world champion. You know, we're not that dissimilar in that regard. I actually am been told that I'm in pretty good shape to become the world champion competitive eater, which is something that I've been working very hard on cultivating.
Rob, you've got to work on what you love. I wanted to make my kids proud, you know, because I didn't want to be this guy that had just, you know, been told, well, you're not going to see so well again, and you're not going to be able to drive, you're not going to be able to do this. And I thought, well, how can I still succeed and win? And so I was always looking for the angles and the edges. That's what I've always done in life. And I thought, well, the VI game can't be any different once you get the edge, once you understand the tech, the sport, what's available, and that all comes through the community and the peer support. And I was quite shy at the beginning, but once you start asking the questions and meeting like-minded people in the VI world, there's a solution for everything you might want to do.
Yeah, it's amazing. It seems like you've impressed your kids too. I mean, you have how many children? 2?
I got 2 girls, yeah.
Right. And I've read some interesting. I read a couple of very, very inspiring little pieces. I guess one of your daughters wrote about you as a father. And how old were your kids when you first had significant visual loss?
So it was 2007 when it really happened fast. And I basically had, my oldest was 7, born in 2000, and my youngest born in 2002. So 7 and 5 was when I really had a sea change in my behavior. But I like to think that I didn't miss a step, and we carry on today. We've got a great relationship. They're 21 and 19 now, finding their own ways in life. But we've learned a lot together on overcoming challenges.
Yeah, well, it's nice to see they're pretty impressed by their dad. So obviously you've had that impression on a lot of people. So you are working in the world of finance. You are learning to play competitive, visually impaired tennis, and yet you still have time somehow to become involved with pretty much every significant visual impaired charitable organization in England. You've been involved with the Royal National Institute of the Blind, Macular Society. You've had a position with the National Health Service. So why don't you go into a little bit about that and tell people the things that you've done outside of your investment activities to try and help the visual impaired population?
No, thanks, Rob. I mean, first off, I took a selfish channel on all of this originally, which was I need to figure out how I'm going to live with this condition. And it was clear to me there was no one-stop shop. So I aligned myself early to the charities because, they're there to help. And, people give and donate to charities because they think it's the right thing to do and it's a good thing to do. But when you actually need to call on them, and not only call on them, but that they help you, and they really help you in terms of transforming your life and getting you on the right path, that's so important. And to me, I've never forgotten 2 or 3 key people that have been most influential in those early calls. Dennis Lewis, as I mentioned, he's now retired, but he was a retired banker and counselor at the Macular Society. Blind in Business, Michael Kenny and Dan Mitchell in particular really helped me and influenced me on those early choices about how I was going to get myself focused and not be depressed, because there's so many opportunities for you to wallow in self-pity and be depressed. And I was really lucky that these people, helped me find solutions to those channels. So at that point, I thought, well, the only place is then to give something back. And bearing in mind that a lot of these charities were very wealthy charities, the RNIB, £100 million a year balance sheet charity, was that they want your time and they want your experience rather than your money necessarily. Obviously, they want your money, but they also want people to work with them to help others. So I thought, well, I've got to help others because I was helped. So I got involved and joined the board of the RNIB as a trustee. And that was a very rewarding experience. I'm still very close with them as an organization and just recorded some podcasts for them, actually, which are soon to be published. And I'm good friends with the chair, who's a lovely lady called Anna Tyler, who herself is also visually impaired, as are many involved with the society, the blind societies. I'm the vice chairman of the Macular Society. They also were one of the very first organizations to help me greatly. And they're one of the most active membership organizations for a community of visually impaired people. And through there, I obviously needed to understand technology and access technology. And so I was introduced to the best blind access technology company in the UK called Sight and Sound Technology. And they, coincidentally, now are my core sponsor for my tennis career. But again, Glenn Tukey, who is the investor and owner of Sight and Sound, a brilliant man. Again, he took on the idea of investing in visual impaired technology and is now one of the biggest access technology companies in the UK. Brilliant man, and I'd like to think a friend as well insofar as what he's achieved. So I aligned myself with areas that could help me from a selfish perspective, but also where I could help them. And access tech and charity seemed to be the best place to be, to really channel peer support and the VI community. From there, I was then invited to be an annual lecturer at the City University for optometry students. So as part of their training, their 3 to 5 year training, they don't really get to meet visually impaired people along the way. We're still a bit of a minority when it comes to the idea of visual impairment and eye disease, which is obviously beyond just the simple refractive error process. So I went along 3 or 4 years ago now to deliver a lecture on living and succeeding with sight loss to the City University of London. And I've gone back every year. And last year was my biggest, actually, even on Zoom. We ended up with, I think, 85 delegates signed in to listen to that lecture, which was very rewarding as well. So I like to think I'm giving back and taking in equal measure. But as we'll probably get onto in our discussion, that's really still not enough for me, because I got to a point now where I'm 50 years old thinking, well, this is all very exciting, but there's more to this sector than just the access technology and the charities. There's the desire and will to really think about how are we going to find cures for the various conditions that we're all inflicted with. And I was shocked and staggered still to this day that I found myself in Moorfields in 2007, where the world leading doctor in macular disease would say to me, well, there's no medicine, there's no registered treatment in anywhere in the world for dry macular disease. And I said, well, that's got to be one of the largest unmet needs in sort of biotech. And that always got me thinking that, really there's either a dearth or a glut of investment or opportunity in ophthalmic biotech. And that's always bugged me. And all I can say, Rob, is, and I'm going to make you blush, is that, last year, purely whether it's serendipitous or not, I was looking, as I always am, for opportunities and solutions to my own condition, knowing that the clock's ticking. So maybe in 10, 15 years, I may get another step change with this macular disease where it gets another grade worse. And I then saw, obviously, the announcement in November from Lineage Cell Therapeutics, which announced that a patient had a reversal or an improvement in dry macula, the world's first registered example of an improvement in my own condition. And you yourself were on the panel and the platform presenting at one of their web forums. And you talked about the ophthalmic market as a whole and the ophthalmic venture capital market. And that really captured my imagination. And I thought to myself, well, here I am with 30 years investment banking experience. I know everybody from all the top guys in the main hospitals, in eye research in the UK. I know all the charities, I know the communities, I know the access tech, the diagnostics. And I should really get involved in ophthalmic venture capital. This is my time to think about doing something like this. This is bringing together of all that I've learned and all that I know in terms of both my network and knowledge, and do something good. And I started small insofar as I signed some NDAs with some companies that were pioneering with some solutions for various conditions in eye disease. And I started to do some research in the global eye disease market opportunity, and it's an extraordinary market in terms of growth, sadly, as we're all getting older and we're all using computer screens, and there's so many reasons why eye disease is becoming ever more prevalent at all different age groups, but obviously largely more so in the older age people. And I got excited that I should therefore get involved. And as a result, I thought about setting up my own venture capital fund, as we talked about, all inspired really from what you've achieved with InFocus. And as a result of that, I literally got meetings and calls to embark on now in July and August with a view to raising capital specifically for the ambition of investing in innovative biotech startups dedicated to ophthalmology.
So is that really the next, I would imagine, stage of your life, as you just alluded to, is going to be to try and identify promising companies, promising technologies, promising opportunities, and potentially develop your own financial vehicle with which to invest in those companies. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. I think, again, it was a slide you put up, Rob, which was that in the year 2000, there were no drugs or treatments for macular disease of any kind. And then there started to be treatments for the wet macular disease market. And here we are 20 years later with a $10-15 billion a year revenue market for the wet AMD market. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. But meanwhile, 90% of the macular disease market is the dry kind, which is what I've got. And I'm thinking, well, that's 10 times bigger a market. But yet here we are in 2021 with no treatments for this condition. And I thought to myself, well, if I don't do anything, or I don't try and work with all the like-minded people that I've met, then I'm going to get to 60 years old and I'm going to lose the rest of my useful sight. And I'll have done nothing to try and avert that. So I figured I've got 10 good years left of trying my damnedest to fix this situation, for not just for me from a selfish perspective, but for the global market of dry macular disease, which just so happens to be the biggest market of unmet need in the world of ophthalmology.
Yeah, it's we'll have to next time we're in New York, we'll have to go out to dinner with Steve Salstein, and Steve Salstein runs the Force Family Network, which is a family office services network, and we have a personal connection. It's a long story, but he was actually my wife's first boyfriend. Don't ask. And I've known him for a long time, and we got acquainted, and he asked me to host that interview with Lineage, based on my expertise as an ophthalmologist and also as a venture capitalist specializing in ophthalmology. And Lineage is a very exciting company, and they've just had some very positive data, and very, very excited to continue to watch them develop their technology. We've in InFocus have come across, we've evaluated hundreds of companies over the last 2 years, focusing on all areas of eye disease, but dry macular degeneration is sort of the holy grail. And there are some promising things hopefully out there. And I think from a selfish perspective, I think one of the differentiators of what we do is that we are run by ophthalmologists with finance experience, and we're motivated to find better treatments because we see what happens to patients now, and we think that medicine can do better. And we're going to go out there and find those things. You have the same motivation from the perspective of actually having that disease, and you just happen to have a finance background. I think that it's unfortunate that you've been afflicted this way, but there's an opportunity here for this to be really meaningful because you're motivated to find the answer.
Yeah, you know what, Rob, though, one thing that I've always marveled on, and I use this a lot, is that technology cured blindness 5 years ago by embedding at source what Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and Google have done for accessibility is incredible and transformational. And I mean that in terms of the financial impact. It's free at the point of source. I was lucky. I was in an investment bank, which meant that any of the software or hardware that was available, I could purchase, right, through my employment. But that didn't mean that there was accessibility in those, 5-10 years ago, there wasn't that level of accessibility available to the masses to live a seamless or an equally opportunistic life. Today, technology is embedded at source and available in the mainstream. Some of the most prolific products were origined out of blindness. So audio books, for example, is one of the most mainstream considerations, or podcasts. They're beautiful products that the blind and the visually impaired can truly access and benefit information for and from. And I was always struck with the fact that technology has evolved very rapidly, as we know, but yet on the medical front, we've not really seen the breakthroughs in so many of the eye disease conditions that one would hope for. But there is some super exciting stuff in the AI and diagnostic stuff, way over and above the drug and device levels or areas of investment. So access tech, AI and diagnostics, I thought were particularly interesting and powerful. And that's largely why I was very excited about the idea, or the dynamic idea, of a venture capital fund that would therefore encapsulate those 5 themes across ophthalmology. So not just drugs and devices, obviously as important as they are, obviously include those, but adding in the access tech, the AI and the diagnostic elements in ophthalmology. There's some exciting things right here and right now that need funding. And for early stage seed funding it's not called the valley of death for no reason. It is the toughest and hardest area to raise finance. And that's where I thought I could really channel some of my knowledge and experience in helping some of these exciting projects get off the ground and give them a chance to really catch up with the market need.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think that one of the things that was sort of motivating for both, my partner Ron Weiss, who's my partner in the venture fund, and I, was that as we started to move, more and more into the world of venture capital financing of early technology, was that we heard continuously over and over again that there's a severe paucity of high quality capital for early investment. And unfortunately, that's when the quality of the capital needs to be the highest, because it's the quality of that capital that increases the probability of success of these companies. And I think that's why what you eventually do in this space will be somewhat transformative, because if there's enough high quality capital out there funding early investments, we will see success. That there is technology that will succeed out there. And what we need is to make sure that the right companies are funded who have the greatest potential to move forward. And it's just, there's not enough money. There just isn't enough money. And the risk profiles have changed, and investment horizons for, larger VCs tend to be somewhat unattainable for early companies. And some of these companies just need, a little bit of tender loving care, and enough capital will move to an inflection point where they can really just explode. And we hope we have those in our portfolio, and we think that there's a lot more of those companies out there as well. So,
I also would say that eye disease, it comes a poor second, really, or poor, comes really low down the list on the public's consciousness for major problems. So cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer, dementia, all of those concentrated conditions obviously have a lot more traction, capital, and press in a consolidated way than eye disease. And, my understanding is that there is just too much fragmentation in the way in which the world looks at visually impaired or eye disease or refractive error problems. They don't consider it as one problem. That is largely why there isn't the same amount of effort that goes into the eye disease market. But yet, all the data that I've looked at shows that eye disease and vision loss, which ultimately leads to greater problems, but eye disease itself is actually one of the largest and fastest growing problems of disability in the world today. And figures from the WHO, UN, etc., put it as really accelerating that growth and doubling over the next 10, 15 years. So it's a really serious problem, both in the developed and in the underdeveloped world. Many cases of blindness are unnecessary and could be prevented. And many cases of visual impairment and eye disease can be helped and improved with the right care, the right attention, the right, obviously, support. And therefore, the whole living and succeeding with a disability, but then investing in the future cures and generations for finding solutions really brings together the whole ethos of a venture capital fund, because you're able to have an impact today on people's lives with certain conditions, so through access tech or through AI and diagnostics, as well as investing in the drugs and devices for tomorrow, which will really yield a return. So that's why I'm very excited in this space right now, because I think we all have a chance to bring it together.
I hate to be done with interviews at any point, but I'm sure we could go on for about another 10 hours, having so much commonality here. But I think that I will sort of summarize this with the simple statement that I am fairly confident that your past history of success and your current motivation, from the personal perspective that you have unfortunately been placed into, that you will succeed, and that you will be somehow responsible for helping to solve some of these problems, one way or the other, using the skill sets that you have. As far as I can tell, I'm not sure you really know how to fail. So good for you, and I'm looking forward personally to working with you, so that we can both sort of align ourselves in a way that will achieve common goals, which is ultimately to help people, and I think we'll do it.
Brilliant. No, I think we will. We'll certainly be the ones that are going to try.
So, Paul Ribb, thank you so much for taking time with us today. Thank you to OIS for allowing me to have this conversation, and hopefully people will listen to this, be inspired, and obviously seek you out, and hopefully help you in ways that you might need to be helped. But again, thank you again, Paul, and thanks again to the OIS listening audience. I am looking forward to future podcasts down the road. Thanks again, Paul.
Thanks, Rob. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Paul found ways to overcome the adversity he encountered with vision loss and is using it to move in a positive direction. To see what other innovators are doing to advance eye care, register to attend the OIS European Innovation Showcase, Tuesday, July 20th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And come back next week for another episode of the OIS Podcast.